say, at the international level. Second is the field of micro-credentials is still immature at both national and international levels. So there is a need for future acceptance of micro-credentials. So micro-credentials that are offered by various organizations as well as universities, are they accepted as part of the education framework? So this is part of the puzzle of what we say. It is still relatively immature, but it must be, there must be a system of recognition if we want to make it part of the national agenda. Assessment of learning against stated learning outcomes and transparent standards is crucial to building trust, recognition, and quality assurance. The third consideration is that there is a need for coherent adoption, development, and recognition of micro-credentials at both a country as well as international level. So we see developments in Australia, Canada, Malaysia, New Zealand. These are the countries that are early adopters of micro-credentials. However, in order to encourage more institutions and more research to see the benefit of micro-credentials, funding is needed to provide to institutions to develop micro-credentials, IT infrastructure, and funding for research in order to see whether micro-credentials has actually benefited the students, the professional students, their employees, their organizations, for example. So that's the first one. We talk about micro-credential. The second part, ladies and gentlemen, is about the recognition of prior experiential learning. We do know that, for example, not everyone were able to enter into a university. So what happened in the context of Malaysia is that the Malaysian Qualification Agency introduced 3 types of recognition of prior experiential learning. We call it APEL, the Accreditation of Prior Experiential Learning, APEL A, C, and Q. And the MQA also issues guidelines in terms of credit transfer for MOOCs courses, the massive open online courses. This is in order to facilitate recognition as a way for them to enter into a university. So with APEL, not only can working adults gain admission into university by leveraging on their prior learning experiences, they can also use these experiences to earn credits. For example, when we see somebody, for example, who was not able to get even a high school diploma, yet through APEL, they are able to enter into a university based on their work experience. So the example that I show here is the categories of APEL. We have A, C, and Q. APEL A is used for admission into higher education institutions. So APEL A. So this will enable, if they apply APEL A, enable individuals with work experience but lack of formal academic qualification. Say, for example, high school diploma, they will be able to enroll into a degree program based on their work experience. Secondly, we have APEL C, which is the credit transfer, which means that, for example, the moment they are able to enter university, they can apply for credit transfer provided they have sufficient knowledge. So there will be an assessment of accumulated knowledge acquired through life experiences in order to get course exemptions. So APEL A, ladies and gentlemen, is for admission. APEL C is for credit transfer. And finally, APEL Q, which is to acquire academic qualifications. So here in this particular case, it is an assessment of the learning, either could be formal, informal, or non-formal for an individual based on accumulated experience, both knowledge and skills, to obtain academic qualifications for the program applied for. For example, somebody with without a high school diploma, but with long number of years of experience and with the knowledge and competencies, the person can then apply to get a first degree, a bachelor's degree. But of course, there are a lot of requirements and assessments before that person is be given APEL Q. So this is an example. I did not put in more details in the context of what are the requirements, what are the assessments, but these are some of the examples. So based on that, in Malaysia, we have the Malaysian Qualification Framework, which is revised in 2018. So using APEL is the right-hand column. Using APEL, somebody can enter into, for example, diploma or advanced diploma, bachelor's degree, or even master's degree, for example, or even a PhD, for example, based on their prior experiences. So again, there are rigorous assessment in order to decide whether a person is eligible to be admitted into APEL A or APEL C or APEL Q. And then the third strategy that is used in Malaysia for the purpose of lifelong learning is the credit transfer for massive open online courses. As we know, MOOCs is very important. It's available widely globally through virtual. In Malaysia, the first MOOC was launched in 2015 through a guideline issued by the Ministry of Higher Education. And then, so MOOC is facilitated by an instructor, whether it is offered as an in-session, which means that based on specific session, or a self-paced mode. And the instructor is normally affiliated to an academic institution, and somebody or someone who has taken MOOC online courses can apply for credit transfer into a university, and the criteria for approval for credit transfer would need to look at the authenticity, the coverage, the sufficiency, the adequacy, the relevancy, the currency of the subject that is learned, fairness, and equity. So these are some of the issues that being looked at in order to ensure that somebody who took MOOC courses will be able to transfer into the respective programs that they're applying for in the university. And then the technical and vocational education and training is also part of the lifelong learning. I will not dwell into this except to say that there is a proper guidance and code of practice issued by the Ministry of Education as well as MQA in this aspect. So looking at the time, what are the challenges and obstacles in implementing lifelong learning? I think one of the things that we look at, we have to look from the perspective of the learner or the students. Secondly, from the perspective of the learning provider. And third is from the ecosystem perspective. I think from the learner perspective, let me just show quickly. I think the issue is about awareness, about time, financial resources, and employers' support. I show here, for example, there was a study done to look at what are the barriers to participation in lifelong learning or adult learning. Many would say they wanted to participate, 25% says they want to participate, but they didn't. Why? One is shortage of time, too busy with the work. Second is shortage of time, family related. Third is lack of financial resources because you need money to pay for the lifelong learning programs. Fourth is you're talking about the inconvenience, time or place. For example, MOOCs could be online virtual, but they may not have the time, or the time is inconvenient, or it is not suitable for them. So, and next is lack of employers' support. So these are some examples, barriers to lifelong learning for adults. Coming back, apart from that, we talk about learning provider. Learning provider will need to have the right infrastructure. So whether you have the right infrastructure, we do know that now, for example, due to COVID, we have to go online. So whether infrastructure is available to have a hybrid model or purely online model. And then again, different institutions offer different types of MOOCs. So they have to have their own unique value proposition. And the focus should be on skills rather than just knowledge. Finally, the ecosystem. Is there governance? Is there recognition? Is there quality assurance standards for lifelong learning? And it must be accessible to all, both, for example, to professional students, to the working adults, to the poor, to the handicapped, and so on. So we talk about accessibility and equity. And finally, the conclusion is that lifelong learning has the potential to be a disruptor. It will help the country to build in terms of skills and knowledge of the population. It may potentially replace the traditional brick and mortar as employers seek role-specific curriculum. Lifelong learning on its own will not lead to economic mobility, but it must be paired with other employer policies and practices that support job success, which means that, for example, employer recognize MOOCs courses or lifelong learning courses, and they will help to equip and to reskill their employees. So I have finished that. So again, given that we have exceeded slightly, again, I thank the organizer, BQA, for inviting me to share my thoughts in this forum. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you, Professor Azmi, for the very informative and interesting presentation. So Professor Azmi emphasized on the need for upskilling through flexible learning approaches such as micro-credentials, recognition of prior learning to ensure no shortages exist in the labor market. He also stressed that governmental efforts should be focused now on developing the required infrastructure and regulation to facilitate the implementation of a flexible learning ecosystem. Dear guests, please be reminded that you can still share your questions in the Q&A box, and we will answer them in the allocated session. Our next speaker is Ms. Ziba Askar, who is a banking professional with more than 20 years in the field. Currently, she is the head of Banking and Finance Center, Bahrain Institute of Banking and Finance, and she served as the deputy chair of the Sustainable Development Committee with Bahrain Association of Banks. Allow me to welcome Ms. Ziba Askar to present her topic on lifelong learning. Ms. Ziba, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone, and I would like to thank you for inviting me to speak today, and I would like to thank Professor Dato for the very informative presentation. And I believe that when it comes to the topic of lifelong learning, Dr. Dato probably touched on the framework that needs to be in place and what kind of enabling environment needs to be in place. And what I will be addressing today in the presentation is basically what we should do as individuals in order to be able to commit to the lifelong learning. And as a quote says, is that you can lead a horse to water, but you cannot actually force it to drink. So sharing with you this quote, which is, the more I learn, the more I realize how much I don't know. And it is something that I personally live by, even for today, preparing for this presentation, putting my thoughts together, made me realize that there are still areas I need to learn more about. And the way I look at things is actually through the lens of curiosity. So I always question myself and I become curious how and wonder, how do I know things? And how do I know that I know enough about anything? So this takes me to actually this competency hierarchy. And there are two elements basically here that I want to touch upon, which is basically the consciousness and the competency. So when it comes to consciousness, consciousness is actually being aware and the self-awareness that we have about how much do we know or how much we believe we actually know. And when it comes to competency, it's about the proficiency and the skills we actually have. So when we are in a stage of the unconscious incompetency, there might be skills that we don't know. However, we are either unaware that we don't know those skills, or we are not believing that we don't know those skills. And this is an area which is a problem, because if you are unconsciously incompetent, how would you know and how would you realize what you need to build and develop in yourself? So that's why the issue about self-awareness and about continuously questioning yourself, do I really know or do I really have enough knowledge, is a very critical point when it comes to the lifelong learning, because we as human beings are wired in a way that we constantly keep on learning. I will give you an example. For example, if you think about what happened as a result of the pandemic, there has been a sudden shift for digital platforms. Even today, we have, I believe, more than 190 people joining us in this conference virtually. At one point in time, there were many people who were not aware how to use the digital platform so that they will connect into Zoom, into Team. But then eventually they had to start learning it. So when you talk about unconsciousness, it means I don't know what I don't know. But when you start to become conscious about this, then you will start to pay attention to what you need to know. And that's when you start to build your skills and develop yourself. Then we move to the stage of conscious competency. If you think about yourself when you first started to have your driving license, you were competent because you already passed your driving test, but you were very conscious when you were driving because you were watching around you, making sure you don't make an accident. So you were putting an effort in order to make sure that you are still mastering the competency level. But when you drive for a number of years, it becomes an autopilot thing, and you start to become unconsciously competent because it becomes a natural habit for you. It becomes a natural awareness for you, and therefore you don't put any kind of intentional effort into making yourself aware of what you are doing. So I believe this is an important thing that requires a person to really think about themselves and what they know and what they don't know. I'm also sharing this with you because actually I like how this infographic is presenting the generational shift in mindset that maybe we don't really pay attention to, or maybe it is very subtle. And the reason this matters is if you look at the workforce of by 2030, and you can see the distribution or the percentage of which generation is actually going to be in the workforce by then. You can also look at the different technologies, the different social media platforms that the different generations have been using, and you can also look at the new jobs that are expected. So something to think about and be mindful about is, do we keep such kind of meter on our own personal growth, on our own personal development? And maybe some of us, you know, in the midst of going through life and being busy with doing work, with managing the family, we might not be observing and monitoring what are we doing to acquire new skills? How are we growing? And I think this is an important element that we should be watching out for, because just as you see, when life passes, there are changes that are happening continuously. And what is the pace that we are catching up with the changes that are happening? And then this takes me to the next slide, which is when you look at the life career theory, and when you look at the different phases of life that we go through. So when we are in the formative school years, we have a pretty much structured pathway for us. So we know that, you know, for you to move from one grade to the other, you need to complete these topics, you need to achieve these grades. And then you move out to the university, you become a little bit more independent, but then suddenly you are in your career. And now in the career, some, they do get kind of structured career progression plan, but some, they just enter into their jobs and it becomes up to them really on how are they going to build themselves. I will also draw your attention to watch how the younger generation are actually learning now. So they are in the structured and formative schooling. They do receive formal education, but I noticed that in them, they have the skill of learning to learn. And they are becoming more conscious about what they enjoy and what they prefer. And probably because of the access in terms of information, you can see them, you can just observe them, how they spend times on YouTube, on TikTok, and they come up with the new things that they actually enjoy, which is something I believe very important for the lifelong learning, because the ability to learn how to learn is a key skill. And like the example I have mentioned earlier about the horse, so you can have the enabling environment, you can have all the competency frameworks there, but until you have the people who develop that sense within themselves and realize why is it important for them to constantly keep on learning, then how much are you really going to achieve? And going back to this hierarchy of needs, so when you have your basic needs that are met, then we go to the element of your psychological needs. And the psychological needs, there is a matter of self-fulfillment. And later on, when I'm going to be presenting to you about the motivations for us, why do we do anything that we do? One of the key elements here is competency. Is, are you good in something? And if you are not, what is your behavior towards yourself about being good into something? And how do you further develop and enhance yourself? So looking at the Sustainable Development Goals, and probably you've been hearing it going a lot, and I will only focus on the area or the aspect that is relevant for the lifelong learning. So the Sustainable Development Goals, they have 5 primary dimensions, and they call them the 5 Ps, which is planet, people, prosperity. Some of you might know it as the triple bottom line. But in addition to these 3, there is the peace and there's the partnership. Why does this matter in terms of the lifelong learning? Because the goals that have been designed and they have been put together, they are very much interconnected. And at the core of them is the intergenerational equity. The intergenerational equity means that let me tell you about the population. So the population currently is approximately 7.6 billion, estimated to reach 9.8 billion by 2050 and 11.2 billion by 2100. It's growing at an estimated rate of 83 million per year. If you only think about this exponential growth and you ask yourself, what kind of resources, finite planetary resources is required to sustain life for this growing population? And that's why when I mentioned earlier is about the pillars of sustainability, that is the planet you have. And for your planet, they have the planetary boundaries, they have finite resources. People keep on growing. How will you sustain life for the growing population? And of course, prosperity is an important element because you do need to have these people having a good life to maintain your peace, as well as the interconnectedness of the globe. So how is this connected to the lifelong learning? Well, one of the SDGs, which was touched upon also earlier, is SDG number 4. Why does this matter? Because for us to be able to sustain life, and you probably might have come across a lot of research that claims there are the current generation the current generation will actually be working in jobs that we don't even know they exist yet. So what this makes us think about is, do we have the brain or the collective brain around the world working together to be able to address all the challenges that the next generation is going to be facing? And one of the key challenges that they are going to be facing is actually going to be the climate risk. So how are they addressing, or how are the technologies, the research that is currently being there going to be addressed? And for this, you need to have an inclusive environment that you have everybody involved in it at different ages so that they can work together on such a thing. Another thing that I wanted to tap upon is the recent report by the World Economic Forum has actually listed the mental deterioration and ranking severe depression as one of the top 5 growing risks, especially as a consequence of COVID. And if we think about our educational system, whether it is the schooling or the university or even the general awareness, how much really people invest into watching their mental well-being? Because at the end of the day, if people are not mentally strong enough and capable to have their inner peace, how can they be productive contributors to the economy? And this takes me to the economic recovery plan, which was announced by Kingdom of Bahrain. And I want to share a quote by Brian Tracy, who actually said, "Those people who develop the ability to continuously acquire new and better forms of knowledge that they can apply to their work and to their lives will be the movers and shakers in our society for the indefinite future." So here we have seen that there has been some direction in terms of actually what sectors are going to be focused on. There has been detailed strategy, key targets that are there. And why this matters to lifelong learning, because when I mentioned earlier that there might be jobs we don't even know that they exist, there are certain sectors here that the Bahrain is focusing on diversifying and increasing its contribution to the GDP. And if we look back at ourselves and we just become curious about ourselves, do we have the skills and the competencies that are relevant for us to be active contributors into this economic recovery plan? Maybe one reflection that you can have for yourself is ask yourself, if you were sitting on the other side of the interview table, will you hire yourself? And if the answer is yes, again, ask yourself why, because you need to focus on what are you good at. And if the answer was, even if for a bit, if you were hesitant, this is your direction to actually tell you what kind of competencies you need to develop and build in yourself. The other thing I wanted to tap upon is actually the different stages that people experience throughout their career. So you have at the graduate level, and I mentioned earlier that some graduates, they do actually have a very nicely designed career progression plan for them. And also some of the executives who make it to the top, you see a lot of investment is made towards them to make sure that they have a very kind of structured succession planning for them and to make sure that they are growing. However, I'm thinking about the category that is in the middle. And this category, if I will give you an example of 2008. 2008, when the economic crisis happened, many people have lost their jobs. And some of them who continued in jobs, maybe they have not been able, or their job requirement did not kind of give them the opportunity to build their skill set that will actually make them employable as per the today's required skill set. So that's what we refer to as underemployment. They have a job, but they don't have the skill that will enable them move and find better jobs and grow in their career. So these are areas that I would say, one should start to think about. And probably if we have among the audience, the educators, is thinking about these groups, is thinking about what are we doing to make sure that when we talk about lifelong learning, we're not only focusing on the fresh graduates, we are also looking at people who deserve a second chance and who could be active contributors into the economy and bringing them back. And sharing with you again a snippet from the World Economic Forum about the top jobs that are increasing in demand and the ones that are decreasing in demand. And again, looking back at ourselves and asking what kind of skills we have that makes us employable in the future. So then when we think about what motivates us, what drives us, well, it could be extrinsic motivations, which means something we are getting from outside. So maybe we want financial reward, maybe we want promotions, but there could also be the negative aspect of it that, oh, if I don't perform or if I don't grow, I'm going to lose my job or I'm going to be punished. And then there's the intrinsic one. And the intrinsic one is I'm doing this thing because I'm enjoying it. And it is giving me a self-fulfillment. It is making me grow. I mentioned earlier about the element of curiosity. Always follow that element of curiosity. What captures your attention? Start to learn more about this. And this takes me to one of my favorites, which is the neuroplasticity. And there is actually a theory by Professor Carol Dweck. She's talking about, I really love her speech. She has a YouTube and you can watch it, but she's really talking about the power of not yet versus the tyranny of the now. And what she means about this is that I have been asking you a lot of self-reflective questions. And what I would hope that you think about is when you think about a skill set that you don't have, you make sure you say, I don't have it yet. Because this takes me to what she highlighted about a fixed mindset versus a growth mindset. And the fixed mindset basically thinks of the limitation of the skills and the talent and the ability and is kind of stuck in the now. This is my limit, this is my capacity. But when you think of a growth mindset, it is the mindset that becomes curious about everything. It is the mindset that when it thinks about failure, it doesn't take it as a permanent thing. It takes it, yeah, I failed, maybe because I don't have the skill yet, but I can definitely build it in myself and improve it in myself. So this takes me to the end of the presentation, and the key message I wanna say is basically that you can have the enabling environment, you can have all the tools available for you, but unless you develop your own stamina, unless you see education as a continuum, as a progress that you can have it throughout time, and give yourself a break that even if I'm not good today, I can work and develop myself, because it's not going to be an easy ride all the time, especially when you are improving. And I forgot to mention earlier, maybe something for you to think about the next time you watch a baby that is trying to eat something. Watch how in the beginning, when they try to put the spoon in their mouth, they will be missing it. And over time, they will learn how to actually correctly put the spoon in their mouth. How do you think this happened? Because the brain continuously rewires itself to build new neural pathways that will make you learn and relearn things. So the more you learn, the more you practice, the more your brain is going to be activated, and it is supporting you, and it becomes easier over time. So the last thing I'm going to say is the importance of professional qualification, because for you to be employable, it's very important that you have an international standard and a benchmark that will not only limit you to the country that you are in, but you can go and work anywhere. So you are actually expanding your horizon. And a final note, I fully respect when you hear a lot of motivational speakers asking you about following your passion and doing the best that you can do. However, I would encourage people to think about three main questions. What do I love to do? Am I good in doing what I love to do? And does that thing I'm good in do or I love to do is actually gonna pay me money? Is it gonna be financially rewarding? And with this, I come to the end of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ziba, for your very interesting presentation. Indeed, yes, continuous learning is an individual behavior. So Ms. Ziba stressed on the need for lifelong learning opportunities, especially with the current industrial growth, and spotted the light on the intrinsic and extrinsic motivational factors towards lifelong learning. And now, allow me, dear guests, to share with you the results of a survey regarding measuring lifelong learning awareness in the Kingdom of Bahrain. Let me share my slides with you. So the Directorate of National Framework Operations has made a short online survey targeted to adult citizens in the Kingdom of Bahrain to measure their awareness of the lifelong learning concept and to get their views and perspectives regarding its benefits and challenges. It was also so beneficial to know the Malaysian perspective as presented earlier by Professor Azmi. And as you can see, we have received 121 responses. Let me first give you a demographic snapshot. The largest group of respondents, with 49%, were in the ages between 30 to 40 years old, followed by 41 to 50 years old with 23%, then between 19 to 21, and the least were above 51 years old. Most of the respondents were Bahrainis, and with regards to their educational level, more than half of them have bachelor degrees and 30% have higher degrees. As you can see from this graph, the majority of the respondents are employed. with 71%, and the rest are either unemployed, self-employed, or students. And in terms of familiarity with the lifelong learning term, 64% said they are familiar with it, while close percentages of 19 and 17 were either not familiar or not sure if they are. And whether they have engaged in lifelong learning or not, 39% of the respondents said yes, while near to half of them said no, and 16% were not sure. And when asking about what lifelong learning can help learners in, 16% said it can help in learning a new career pathway. 14% said it can help in learning a new language, 10% for learning a new technology, 6% for a new sport. And most importantly, we can see that the rest of the respondents almost agreed that it can help in all of these, which actually gives a good indication of its benefits from their point of view. When further asked those who engaged in lifelong learning why they did so, the largest number of responses were for personal development, while almost close percentages of 25 and 21 were for professional development and new skills for employment. So we can see here that people believe in lifelong learning and that it could help and aid in their career development. Moving to recognition of prior learning as one of the strategies for lifelong learning, we have asked them regarding its benefits, and we can see that 44% responded that it improves people's skills for better employment opportunities. 28% responded that it improves the transfer between education and training sectors, while 16% said it reduces cost, and 11% said all of the above. Regarding the challenges, on the other hand, near to half of the respondents near to half of the responses were about time constraints that could prevent them from engaging in lifelong learning, followed by its costs. While 10% said lack of resources such as material, tutorials, or maybe equipment is one of the challenges. While from another side, we can see that only 8% and 6% of the responses were for the lack of awareness, confidence, and motivation. And this indicates that people have confidence with lifelong learning and motivated to practice it, which shows their positive perspectives that it can continuously help them improve their personal skills and develop and grow in their careers, as noticed from the previous slides. And finally, we asked regarding the barriers, what could be the barriers for applying recognition of prior learning in higher education and vocational institutions from the society's point of view? And we can see that 40% were for the lack of awareness, 21% were for the direct or indirect financial constraints, 19% were for the absence of regulations, followed by 11% for the complexity of the process. So to conclude, we can see that there is a good percentage of familiarity with the lifelong learning concept in Bahrain society, and people here in the kingdom are to some extent aware of its benefits. So however, there still is a need to increase the efforts for building a culture that promotes it in all sectors and develop the proper infrastructure to facilitate its implementation. And that was it. Thank you for listening. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we move on to the question and answer session. So I would ask, please, dear panelists, please to join us and open your cameras. Okay, so we have some questions for Professor Azmi and Ms. Ziba. We'll start with Professor Azmi. Professor Azmi, from your experience, what are the tools that will help implement lifelong learning as practiced in your region, and what is the first step to implement lifelong learning?
Thank you very much, Sarah. I think if you look in the context of whether you are a qualification agency or if you are a university, for example, as a university,
you're muted.
I'm muted. Okay. We can look from the perspective either as a regulator or from the perspective of a provider of higher education. Let me talk initially about the provider of higher education, and subsequently, I wear another hat because I'm also a council member or board member of the Malaysian Qualification Agency. I think from the perspective of provider, I think we must encourage those providers to offer MOOCs courses, the massive open online courses, to the public, depending on the specialization of each respective institutions. For example, at NQF, we offer a program called MICRA. So MICRA is the MOOCs courses, and we have different aspects of courses that are offered to the public. So we chop one subject into smaller components, so anybody can accumulate those subjects and later on use it for the purpose of admission as well as credit transfer. Because again, in Malaysia, there is a proper framework for admission as well as credit transfer based on the MOOCs courses. So these are already accepted as part of the framework. So it's important to have the regulation put in place so that you can encourage workers, employees to take those MOOCs courses, the lifelong learning courses, so that they are able to equip themselves and subsequently be recognized by the employer, as well as get a formal qualification at the end of the day. So that's my answer to this question. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Azmi. We have a question for Ms. Ziba. So Ms. Ziba, in your opinion as a banking professional, how effectively does lifelong learning address the skill gaps in the Bahraini labor market, especially in the financial sector, from your point of view?
Okay, in terms of the skill gap, I will speak as BIBF because we are under the umbrella of the Central Bank of Bahrain. And what we do internally is we continuously engage with the market in order to know exactly what kind of training programs we have. So for example, we have in our board of directors, it's chaired by the governor, His Excellency, and we have CEOs of the top banks and insurance companies who are sitting there. In addition to that, we have our programs organized into academies. They're not academic, but they are offering centralization. And for each of those academies, we have an advisory committee that constitutes from senior members who work in the financial sector. So we are constantly engaging with them and presenting to them our programs, and we receive feedback from them to ensure that the skill gaps are actually met. In addition to this, as part of the economic recovery plan and the objectives and the targets set for the employment and the training, we have submitted our plan in terms of how we are going to be supporting the government in terms of addressing the future employability skills. I hope I addressed the question.
Yes, thank you. We have a question from the participants to Professor Azmi. What courses fall under micro-credentials?
What courses falls under micro-credentials? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there is many, depending on the sector that you are in. For example, like Ziba also, NQF is a university established by the central bank. So our focus is on the financial sector, but beyond that, we are also in the what we call sustainability area. Okay, so what we do is that we offer different massive online courses to the public. Okay, say for example, we take one of our courses, say for example, capital market. So we break down into smaller components under Micra, and individuals can take those at their own pace. And then every components of our Micra, we have assessment. So they can then accumulate. And once they accumulate this becomes what we call micro-credentials. And then if they want to apply to enter into our program, they can then apply through what we call the Apple A, which is developed by the MQA. Then it can be used as not only admission, but also later on transfer of credit. So again, as I said, universities can develop the MOOCs program, but there must be the overarching regulatory framework that is provided by the qualification agency or by the Ministry of Higher Education. So in this way, you encourage people to continue to learn, to study, to equip themselves. Bear in mind, the focus of lifelong learning is mainly for the purpose of skills and competencies. Of course, knowledge is very important, but as we move towards the Industrial Revolution, the fourth Industrial Revolution, we want to equip the population with the right knowledge, right skills for the future. So therefore, universities must work with the industry to develop that kind of requirements and providing the support. Which support? The government must provide that support. I recall in your example earlier on, you were showing the issue of financing. Yes, it is an important component because not everyone are able to pay for the micro-credentials or the MOOCs courses. This is where the issue of equity comes into the picture. How they can get financing either from financial institutions or from the employer so that they can continue to reskill and upskill themselves. Thank you.
Thank
a long
you,
answer to
Professor
your question.
It's totally okay. I have another question from participants as well to you. How are you dealing with the normal teaching load for instructors who are actively involved in MOOC?
Okay, we do that as beyond the normal teaching load, which means that the normal teaching load is they teach the whatever teaching load that they have for the normal courses. So MOOCs is different. So there are certain incentives that we give to our faculty members who are involved in MOOCs, because again, MOOCs requires different sets of skills. So we need to train our instructors in terms of how to be a good instructor in MOOCs. So there must be strong support within the university. And as I mentioned earlier on, strong infrastructure must be there. Thank you.
Okay, and we have a question to both speakers. So how lifelong learning would be helpful for elderly? And can we, the younger generation, contribute in some way for the benefit of those who are above 50 and need assistance?
Maybe Ziba.
Yes. So one thing probably I missed in the presentation is the volunteer mindset. And I think that is very important because, especially when it comes to the elderly, and I mentioned briefly about the example of COVID and how certain people didn't even know how to use technology. So back in 2020, I believe, we have done training conducted with the BBK actually to train 100 Bahraini women on digital literacy. And the reason for this was that there were a lot of mothers, grandmothers sitting at home, and they had to take care of their children who had problem accessing, their school virtually. So we started training them from that perspective. But when it comes to the younger generation, and when you build in them that sense of volunteer thing, the reason I'm connecting this with the elderly, because the volunteer is dedicating their own time into helping somebody else. And maybe that's something, that the youth, especially, I'm very happy to see the Bahraini youth very active because we are heavily engaged with them. So it could be something they can work on, such an initiative to have a plan that they are going themselves, reaching out to the elderly, helping them in whatever possible way. I like this idea.
Yes, this would be a very good idea. Okay, we have a question again to Ms. Ziba. as an industry professional, how do you think we can change the mindset associated with lifelong learning?
So this is something that I believe part of it is the responsibility of the employers, but a bigger part of it is the responsibility of the individual themselves. And there is also the element of the stamina. There's also the element of motivation. Why do you do what you do? So sometimes you hear some people that are saying, you know, why should I? Why should I bother? I mean, this person, no matter what the employer does to them, if they don't change that kind of mentality within themselves, it's very hard for them to actually improve and develop change. So to answer this question, the employers could be having more awareness sessions within their entities, and they could also get engaged into more public awareness, not only limited to their organizations, but I think increasing the awareness in this aspect is a very important element. And just to add on this, so we do have wellness programs, and we are seeing increased interest from employers that are actually engaging us to train their staff and to help them cope with the mental well-being.
Thank you, Ms. Ziba. We have a question to Professor Azmi. I think this is from higher education. So they asked, can universities reduce some of the courses in their curriculums which are not in direct relation of the field to the field of study to reduce time and effort, and replace those courses with credit hours to conduct site training managed by universities to build the students' capacity?
Obviously, if you look at many universities now, I mean, getting a degree is just one of the things. But what you look at the end of the day is somebody who is well, you know, getting a wholesome kind of education in a university. We take the case of a bachelor's degree. They may graduate with a Bachelor of Accounting, for example, but you need other skills to equip them to be a very good graduate. So in that particular case, many universities now globally, apart from offering the academic program, they offer additional leadership, the soft skills component, in order to enhance the skills of those graduates. Because at the end of the day, students must be able to have both technical knowledge as well as the other skills, the soft skills, the communication skills, you know, the leadership skills. So these are all very important components that must be provided by a university. So there is part and parcel of a training of, and it can be, for example, you could create credits out of it to make it mandatory for students. In Malaysia, we have a term called finishing school, where apart from they get a degree, they also have to go for a number of modules in order to enhance their skills further. And it is a requirement for those students to pass through those finishing school programs.
Yes.
Okay.
Another question to Professor Azmi. In your opinion, what is the main challenge when it comes to regulating micro-credentials?
Okay, thank you. I think one is that you have different quality of micro-credential courses being offered by, it could be by universities, by training providers, and so on. So what is important, particularly for a nation like Bahrain or even Malaysia, is that one is that there must be a strong collaboration between lifelong learning providers with the university, for example. Why you want to do that? Because at the end of the day, those people who acquire life learning certificates, they want to get certain formal qualification. They either want it to be part of their bachelor's programs or master's program. So we must ensure that certain quality is being met, which means that it must be met against the standards that are being developed or that have been developed by the qualification agency. So you must meet that standards. So anybody, any institutions that provide the micro-credential courses must meet that standards. Once its standards are met, then it can be given, for example, credit transfers to a university programs.
Yes, the answer actually gives the answer of another question that was coming on the way. Thank you very much. Ms. Ziba, in your opinion, how can the participation of adults in lifelong learning be facilitated and more accessible?
Accessibility, I think one aspect of it is what I mentioned earlier about learning how to learn, which is there is a lot of information, there are a lot of resources that are available, and a lot of them are, by the way, free of charge. And like, for example, when 2020 COVID happened at BIBF in collaboration with the Ministry of Labor, we have opened access for the unemployed people to actually enroll into our programs. So I would suggest that as part of, if people have a financial issue, at Bahrain, of course, Tamkeen is playing a major role in supporting the development and the training. And there are a lot of programs targeted specifically for the unemployed. So it is about putting the individual effort to knowing what kind of support system, first of all, is around. It's about being able to be self-motivated to reach out to the different institutions and ask for help. Because if someone believes, I don't know what to do or how I can get access to information, at least put the effort into making your research to know what is available, who are the people you can contact with. And I think in Bahrain, I believe we have a lot of support system, but it's just a matter of putting the individual effort into reaching out and asking for help.
Yes. One last question for Professor Azmi. How can employers and professional bodies aid the development and implementation of lifelong learning?
Sorry, can you repeat that question?
How can employers and professional bodies aid the development and implementation of lifelong learning?
Okay, employers as well as the professional bodies. Okay, I think for employers is that, as we know, life cannot be stand still. Employers will have to continue, to change in order to meet the challenges of the future, which means that one, they must provide the facilities and the avenue for the employees to get lifelong learning. It could be provided by the employers themselves, or it could be provided by training providers, or like universities, for example. So it's important to set aside a certain amount of budget every year or allocation to support the training of the staff. So that's one in terms of allocation of money and providing that support services to employees. But I think in the context of the professional bodies, for example, I'm talking about, are you talking about like the accounting bodies and so on? For that kind of thing, we require what we call the continuous professional development programs. Each of those professional bodies typically require their members to acquire a certain amount of hours per year that they have to equip themselves in. So it's important for those professional bodies to recognize the micro-credential courses, MOOCs courses, as meeting the requirements of their professional requirements, annual professional requirements. I think so that is in a nutshell what they need to do.
Thank you very much. So thank you very much, Professor Azmi and Ms. Ziba, for this wonderful discussion, and thank you for the answers. Ladies and gentlemen, before we end our session, please allow me to share the closing remarks and recommendations. There is a stressed need to develop national and international strategies related to lifelong learning. The adoption of flexible learning would provide a resilient response to changes in the labor market needs. Supporting the flexible learning strategies with research and pilot studies is required to gauge the effectiveness of its implementation. And with the recent technological advancements, especially with the current pandemic of COVID-19, the usage of technology is in all stages of learning would facilitate and address some of the barriers to lifelong learning. Increasing awareness of lifelong learning opportunities to potential learners is highly needed. And finally, introducing micro-credential qualifications would enable flexibility and scalability in developing training programs. Ladies and gentlemen, finally, we come to the end part of our forum. I would like to thank our speakers for their valuable contribution and you all for your participation. And we would love to have your feedback, so appreciate if you take a few minutes to fill in the feedback form and you will be automatically directed after the end of the session. Hope the session was beneficial for everybody. Have a nice day and assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.